Hello, in this video we're going to talk about deformers. So here I've got a cylinder, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the space bar, go to the side view, and I'm going to create a joint chain. So under rigging, I'm going to go to skeleton and add create joints, and I'm going to go to skin. Oh, pardon me, I'm also under skeleton. I'm going to add create IK handle, and I'm going to use the option box for that. And I'm going to go to skin. I'm going to say bind skin with the option box. Paint skin weights with the option box. Okay, so I'm going to start out by making a joint chain. So let's reset the tool, and I'm going to hit the 4 key so that I've got shading on. Hold down X, and I'm going to snap to the grid. And I'm going to backspace on that one. And for this middle one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a slight bend in it. And the reason you would do that is for IK, and I'll show you how that works momentarily here. And I'll go ahead and for this third one, I hit escape there, and for the third one, I'm just going to hold down the X and just snap there. Okay, so that's making a joint. And go back to the perspective view. This icon right here will make the it's called X-ray joints. It'll make the joints invisible. So think of this as like a leg, and this is like a knee. Okay, so now what we're going to do is take the joints and bind it to the mesh. So I'm going to go to the bind skin. Let's set the settings. Now what this does, max influences, it determines how many of the vertices, or it determines how many influences or joints each vertice can be weighted to. So I generally don't go as high as 5. I'll generally set this 2 at the max. Sometimes I just set it at 1 and just edit it later. Okay, so I'm going to just hit apply. So that not only does the operation, but it also applies these settings to the option window. Okay, so the object turned magenta, which means that it is being driven by, or being influenced by something else, in this case a deformer, which is a joint chain. If I click on hierarchy, it's going to select all 3 joints, and it also makes them a different color when you bind them. And then if I go to rotate, what's going to happen is now I can rotate the limbs or the joints, and everything follows along. Now notice we're dealing with a hierarchy, so top level rotating and the bottom ones follow along for the ride. Something else is very important. Every time I test something like this, first thing I do is just hit the Z key so I can just zero it back out. Now in the case of the joint here, this is always going to have a translate on it because it is offset about 4 units from the top. the top root, was built at 9 units in Y. So with these joints, you can't really freeze the transformation and zero them out, because they have a because of their hierarchical relationship and the nature of joints, they need to know where they are in space. Just in case you're wondering. Now also, now that I've added the skeleton, if I rotate, you can see that, for instance, right here, this area is getting a little bit compressed. And so the reason being is that this vertex E is partially weighted to this joint, partially weighted to this joint. So I can edit that. So let's hit 0 or Z. So I select the mesh, and then I come into the paint skin weights tool. And the way this works is that I've got a brush here, and it's best used with a tablet. So if I hold down the B key, B as in boy, drag left and right, it changes the diameter of the tool, of the brush. And so for joint 1, I'm in replace here. So what this does is anything that's white is 100% weighted to the joint. Now, if you recall, I had some of the stretching here, or these kind of collapsed in. So what I'm going to do with just this row is I'm just going to paint it in a little more strongly. Let's go down to the second joint. Same thing, I'm just going to paint this row in a little more strongly. And I've got the third joint. And I could paint that in as well, more strongly, and this would really only take effect as if I was going to maybe rotate that end joint. So I generally use replace. I might take the opacity down, and if I want to smooth, I could come in here with the smooth option and maybe kind of smooth these values out a little bit. I usually just use replace and smooth. Okay, so Q to get out of the tool. So now if we bend it again, so imagine this like a leg. This is a knee, and it's facing in Z, forward in Z. So now if we rotate again, see that deformation here isn't quite as, it doesn't smudge or crush in as much. So generally when you bind a character, you'll have to spend some time painting weights. It's really not a big deal. A lot of people get intimidated by it and find it too tedious, but it's a way to get fine control of how your characters deform. Okay, so that's a joint chain. Next we'll get into IK and controllers.